For more than 70 years, Alcoholics Anonymous has been helping people find sobriety with its 12-step program. AA introduced us to Chris, a Manhattan resident whose drinking was out of control by his mid-teens. Today, he shares his journey. Chris, welcome to Cityscape.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let me just cut to the chase here and ask you, how old were you when you had your first drink?
Around the age of 3.
3?
Yeah, it was, and I remember exactly what it was, Fleischmann's whiskey. My father was a factory worker and was a shot and a beer guy. He used to call them Boilermakers back then, and he used to leave it, laying on his little table. And he got up one day, and I don't know why, I just walked by it one day and wondered what was in that little glass, and I grabbed it and I took a drink. Not exactly because I had a hard day in the sandbox, but I just for some reason had a curiosity about it, and so I took myself a sip and choked violently, and as any 3-year-old or 4-year-old might.
Now, one would think that would have turned you off to alcohol. I remember
think.
taking a bite out of my dad's cigarette when I was a kid, and you know what? I never wanted to go near a cigarette.
Well, that's the funny thing about people who have, say, alcoholic and drug addiction. You would think, logically, that with some of the results that happen, that somebody would immediately walk away from it. But for some, I don't know, there's this little thing that happens in the brain that says this time it's going to be different. And I've heard that story 1,000 times over.
How old, though, were you when alcohol became a problem?
15. I was in a high school party and I got drunk for the very first time, and it was like a switch went off. The feeling that I had gotten from that was that feeling that I had been looking for all my life. You just felt connected. You felt powerful. No fear, no inhibitions, no nothing. And so I sought that for every day after that.
So would you say you were lacking self-confidence without the alcohol?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think that, and that seems to be the common denominator among a lot of people who suffer from alcoholism. At the bottom of all of it is there's a lot of just fear. I mean, every normal person goes through that, and when they're younger or even older, that's sort of feeling of not fitting in. But it seems to be exacerbated within the alcoholic. It's if you feel a little out of place on a scale of 1 to 10, say about a 2, most alcoholics I've ever met, it's about an 11.
So do you then trace your alcoholism to that party, that drink, that night that you got drunk?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that definitely was what lit the fuse, if you will, this magical one-night period, and I sort of chased that high, if you will, for every chance I could after that. But unfortunately, it becomes hit or miss. Alcoholism, as I've learned, is a progressive disease as well, and I was not a big guy as a drinker, but I was able, in a very short period of time, my tolerance grew and was drinking, football players under the table kind of thing, and functioning as people would look at me kind of, geez, what's the matter with you kind of thing, and I'd wonder what was the matter with them.
So you can't equate alcoholism with drunkenness.
No, I mean, and I think that's the most common fallacy, and that's part of why some of the literature in AA and really breaks that down and differentiates it to 2 simple questions. Basically, if you pick up a drink and you find that you have little to no control over the amount you drink, or that if you try to quit, you find you can't quit entirely, and I'm quoting pretty much verbatim from the book, you're probably an alcoholic. So,
when did you realize that you had a problem?
It was actually fairly quick. I mean, I got sober when I was 19, actually, and it was 4 years of heavy drinking, yeah, and I was, as they say, spared that last 15 or 20 years of literal hell. AA has evolved in so much over the years that a lot of very young people are coming into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I actually I was very fortunate. I met a gentleman, and I was completely liquored up and was about to get into a fight with a guy who was about 4 times bigger than me, and I'm screaming at him in the middle of this club. But he never lectured me or anything. He just basically said to me one day, I'm going to this meeting, and you're welcome to come if you want. And it caught my attention. Didn't think I had a problem, but I liked the meeting. I thought it was a really nice group of people, and they were friendly, which is not what I was used to being around. I found nothing but welcome and good spirits in AA meetings, and I think that's a lot of why newcomers become so attractive, because you come in so beat down and you've been through literal hell, and when you find these friendly faces, it's a real oasis.
But at that first meeting, you weren't ready to stand up and say, "Hi, my name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic."
No, I got drunk after my first meeting, and I had every intention of drinking that night. And as cocky and as obnoxious as I was actually struck by the spirit in the room, if you will. but way far away from acknowledging that I had any kind of problem.
So how long after that first meeting that you went to did you say to yourself, you know what, I am one of these people?
I had this sort of grace of God, if you will, guy put in my life, and he'd say, hey, by the way, I was going to go to the 7:30 meeting, do you want to come? And so I was drinking for about a year and a half and going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous.
AA does not have you pledge, I will not drink.
No, not at all. And that's what makes it a lot different. There is no Irish pledge, if you will. And the irony is there's nowhere in the literature that says don't drink. Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. You're free to come and go as you please. And I think that's what sometimes throws new alcoholics to the program, because they're just waiting for somebody with the fists up to tell them, I'm waiting for somebody to tell me what to do. And nobody does. I was in all kinds of pain. It was a bit of a basket case when I got, first came into AA. But people were very tolerant, very supportive, and I think that's really what saved my life.
So you weaned yourself off alcohol?
Yeah, well, I had quit immediately. I mean, I had stopped for about 3 or 4 months and then went on a pretty bad bender one week. I had no intention of drinking. It really just caught me off guard. It just took barely 24 hours for me to get right back off to the races. You just go right back where you left off.
So how does AA work to help you kick it?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think part of it, really, the biggest suggestion we have for people who are brand new, to just keep showing up, and keep, feeling your way out. We don't force feed steps down people's throats. And I find that allowing people to go through their own individual journey is what helps, because that's what helped me. And so I had a big chunk of friends. We go out to dinner, to go bowling, movies, and things like that. And it really it made it easier not to drink. But I was still just hadn't been dealing with why I was drinking to begin with. And, I kind of have been not drinking for 6 or 7 months. And I'm like, okay, I'm not drinking, but wow, all right, I feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. This doesn't sound like happy, joyous, and free as AA promises. So something must be up here. So I got what we call a sponsor, which was somebody who'd, been through the steps and had a lot more experience and time than I did, and who was able to walk me through those 12 steps. And that's what, where we find that people really begin to change their behavior. And that's really what, helps long-standing sobriety, is that it's in the changing of the behavior and your outlook and things like that. But the results have been amazing, and it's humbling too, because you think you're proud of yourself on one end, and the other hand, it keeps you humble to say, I still have a long way to go.
I think a lot of people are familiar with the 12 steps of AA, but what would you like people to know about that, or what do you think are the biggest misnomers about those 12 steps?
A lot of people are resistant because there's a spiritual aspect to the program too, and the word God does appear in the 12 steps. The idea of sitting in a room full of people that I don't really know that well and talking about spirituality or talking about your feelings or talking about, is something that I made fun of in my teens, and there's no way that I would have ever done this. But I got to tell you something, that, the pain of my alcoholism trumped my attitude about what the treatment was. Realizing that there's a power greater than me, and that I need to take inventory of myself, of my behavior, and so forth. If I've done wrong, I make amends for it, and I try to be helpful to other people. I mean, that's really what it all breaks down to, if you want to take all the fluff out of it. And that's, I think, the common theme in just about every spiritual movement or religion you would come to.
How much of it comes down to you understanding why you're drinking in the first place?
If you asked me when I was 18, 19 years old, when I first came in, why I drank, I would tell you because I love to get drunk. And that's as honest as I could possibly be. But the longer I stay sober, I started to learn why I drank, because I wasn't drinking anymore. And, you start to realize there's a whole host of internal problems going on, and they really come to the surface when you stop drinking. So many people are encouraged when they come to AA to get involved in service, whether it's making coffee at a meeting or answering phones or even doing an interview like this, and trying to be of help, that kind of gets you out of yourself. And certain things that people do, quite naturally do volunteer work, but it's just funny that alcoholics have to be told to do this sort of thing. Like, you're going to feel better. Okay, I'll do it. That's what we find. That seems to work.
Did you have a support system at home, or were you on your own with this?
That's a good one. I would say I was on my own about this, and I come from a family of drinkers, and my drinking at family functions and so forth was never, I would say it was rarely frowned upon unless I was an embarrassment, and I was more than a few times, which was funny because I used to resent my father's drinking, and then he was embarrassed by mine. I was like, how ironic is that? But when it was discovered that I was going to AA, I would say it was more of a strange taboo topic in the house. No one really talked about it, let's put it that way. In fact, no one really talks about it even today, and I've been sober for quite a while.
But AA does offer help to families that want to be involved, right?
It affects the rest of the family and friends and so forth in a way that's different than, say, if somebody had cancer or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the behavior and the turmoil and the emotional anguish and so forth that can be around alcohol, it tends to permeate the family.
Did you solely just go to AA, or did you seek other types of help?
A number of years into my sobriety, I saw a therapist for the very first time, and that was very helpful too, because AA really only claims to be able to help with its experience in alcoholism, and is very clear that, you know, we are not psychiatrists, we are not people's bankers, we're not attorneys, we're not any of that stuff. And if you need outside help, we encourage you to do that. You know, it plugged a lot of holes that AA did not plug in, so it was a nice additive. That's a great question, actually.
When you were going through your recovery and you were standing up and falling down and standing up and falling down again, you mentioned that you had a sponsor. So describe that relationship, because I know you're a sponsor now.
Yeah, I sponsor about 8 guys right now. Part of how AA works is that, you know, I'm helped by helping you. And that's what somebody did for me. There was a guy when I was about a year and a half sober. It was a we thing, if you will, and we walked together through the journey. And that's really what the help is, that you're not by yourself doing this. You know, you're not, and there's no reason to be. But I've had a number of sponsors over the year because everybody's wired a little different, you know, and the guy who first took me through the steps was not a big talker. My more recent sponsors are not only good with the steps, but they're a good counsel, if you will, to talk to. They're a lot older than me, have a lot more life experience, and I can run a situation by them. What do you think about this? A real voice of reason. And that's what I try to do with the guys that I work with as well. I sponsor some guys that are brand new in the program, some guys that have been around for 3 or 4 years that maybe will call me up and say, hey, I'm having a problem with this. What do you think about this? And, you know, that's really what it is. It's more of like a friendship and fellowship thing rather than like the professor and student, if you will.
Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic?
That's what we say. There's the old expression, you know, once a cucumber becomes a pickle, is never a cucumber again. And yeah, I would exactly say that. You know, I've been sober for about 16 years. There is no belief in my mind whatsoever that if I were to leave this studio right now and, you know, go to a bar and have a drink, that, you know, I'd be fine with that. So yes, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, absolutely. You know, I don't process alcohol like most people do. I had a conversation with my mother one time when I was about 2 years sober, and I still wasn't quite getting this thing, and because she would have a couple drinks every night. I'm like, okay, she drinks every night, but I don't get this thing that she's an alcoholic. I said, Ma, what happens to you when you drink? I mean, how does it feel? She said, oh, it relaxes me. You know, I like to. I said, I understand that, but what about if you start to feel the effects of alcohol? How do you feel? And she says to me, well, if I start to feel like I'm getting a little out of control, I don't like that feeling, so I just stop. And that's when I realized the difference. My thought was, that's when I'm just getting started, you know. And a lot of times for me, you know, I hear so many AA stories over the years. If I have a conversation with a non-alcoholic, sometimes that more reaffirms to me that I'm an alcoholic. You know, if I hear it and I just see people and how they react around alcohol, I don't get it. I don't relate to it. I don't get it. Because that's not me. That's not how I drink.
How differently do you live your life now? Do you go to bars with friends? Do you hang out at clubs? What don't you do that you did before?
Well, I also really didn't hang out in many bars too because of how young I was when I was drinking. But you know, if I'm out with friends and so forth, and AA is a big proponent of that. You know, we're not saying you have to avoid alcohol at all costs. You know, if you're out on business or you're out in a social event and your friends want to go to a bar and you feel comfortable, go. But if you don't feel comfortable, then don't go. I mean, we have stipulations about that. If you feel like you're on solid ground, go ahead and do that. So we don't avoid life. I would love for people to understand is AA is not a group of teetotalers, and we're not anti-alcohol. I love alcohol. You know, I love booze. You know, so I am not against booze. I just know I can't drink safely. So I have been to gatherings, bars or lounges and so forth. I don't hang out in them on a regular basis because there's really no reason for me to do so. My social life does not revolve around going out to the clubs and things like that. It's just that, when you stop drinking and you stop partying like that, you just quite naturally, your lifestyle does change.
How understanding are people? Is there a stigma attached?
Any kind of addiction, there's a definite stigma around that, because I think people don't understand what's happening internally with the addict or alcoholic.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Chris is a recovering alcoholic. He lives in Manhattan.